And so she's continually reestablishing her social capital. She didn't have family either, which does hinder her a little bit, but her networks of friends sustain her more than the other woman we're talking about. Eventually, social capital is not enough, right? Eventually, poverty, old age, failing health kicks in, and they aren't able to keep up the same lifestyles. They aren't able to fight against pension rules as much. No money is eventually going to mean you have to settle for a little bit less. You have to settle for maybe lower quality health care, lesser accommodations, residential situations, and acquiescing to the pension rules. The lack of family support, lack of family connections, lack of family money eventually means no more social capital. And the failing health really did get both of them in the end as well, not having that independence to be actively creating social networks anymore. So things to think about. A lot of people in social science talk about social capital, and to some extent it's a favorite concept amongst certain sociology circles. But I think these case files definitely can show both the benefits of having social capital, but also the limits to social capital, in that social capital works better if you actually have economic privilege at the same time. Once that economic privilege is gone, you can still have social capital, but it will dwindle over time, and it can't stand alone for too long. In terms of aging, there's some literature that says that as individuals age, they have to have different kinds of social capital because family members are inevitably going to die. Their health is going to fail. Their friends are going to die. Their networks are going to have to become different and be sustained differently in order for people to keep up the same lifestyle. So unless the economic privilege is sort of standing in alongside social capital, it's hard to maintain social capital in aging. There's definitely differences by gender. Men definitely were pushed by the Hannon visitors to keep up job connections more than the women were. Women were actually keeping up more social connections, club memberships, things like that, than men were as well. Women actually fought more against pension rules as well, at least from our reading of the cases. I think this is very relevant for contemporary times, but I'm going to actually sort of cut that discussion short, and I can talk about it at the end if there's questions.
I hope you'll be able to stay around and talk to us, raise questions, comments. I'm going to very quickly go over these final slides. I'm not going to read them. You're educated people who can read fast, so you can just read those slides while I'm talking. So what does all of this have to do with us now? Why is the history of old age relevant to us now? First of all, there are many risks in growing old. Disruptions in your life, and these risks are inevitable. There is no way to avoid the risk of growing old. They're not equally distributed. Women, minorities experience more risk in growing old than others. Some risks have lessened since the 1930s. People do not die as much on the job, for example, but there are risks arising, such as unemployment after 50 in a global economy. Risks are structurally created by an economy that cannot support sufficient income across the life course for all people. There is happening now in the United States what's called the Great Risk Shift. This is the title of a book by political scientist Jacob Hacker. The point is that the responsibility for these risks is being increasingly shifted back to the individual, away from the government, away from corporate pensions, for example. Workers are now asked increasingly to take more responsibility for their retirement planning and their health care through stock investments, which are highly volatile and unpredictable over time. And many of the risks associated with old age have not changed. We still get old and disabled. We still have trouble affording health care. Managing risk, the Social Security Act of 1935 was deliberately established to assist families, not just old people, families in supporting elders. So Social Security helps everybody of all ages, because if you don't have Social Security, somebody has to support old people, and that's children and families. The fact is, people rely on Social Security now. These are the facts. Tom mentioned Social Security is just as relevant today as it ever was, and there's the data to support it. About half of the income is, 53% of people is from Social Security exclusively. About 20% of people rely entirely on Social Security income in old age. And despite that, 16% of elders are still poor. On the left side, the rhetoric that we hear, the generations in conflict, greedy geezers, that ignores the social and economic contributions of old people, especially and particularly caregiving, family caregiving. So my co-editor, Toni Calasanti, and I, she's the feminist sociologist who looked at, in the final chapters of our book, did a critique of old age law, and I looked at the problem from the perspective of feminist ethics, and we came to the same conclusion. The problem is an ideology of individualism in the United States, and the assumption of personal responsibility for one's care as opposed to collective responsibility, but that's totally impractical, illogical, because we're all interdependent. We all rely on each other for our care and our security. So we have to acknowledge our interdependence across the generations, and we have to behave accordingly by voting for social insurance and preservation of Social Security and Medicare benefits. And, Toni concluded this, and I think she's right. It took the outcry of older people and their families in the 1930s to pass the Social Security Act of 1935, and I think we're going to have to get more active and vocal again. So this is something to leave you with, a little verse from the case file that reflects our shared humanity. Life is a burden to everybody. If it doesn't come to you in your earlier life, it's definitely going to come to you in old age. So we thank you and invite your questions and comments.
Questions, comments? Before you ask the question, I want to acknowledge in the audience former President Phyllis Bloom, who is a social worker. She's the Dean of the College of Social Work, the School of Social Work, so it's very appropriate for her to be here.
I'd like to make one comment that's not covered in the case files, but Ruth knows about this. The Luella Hannon had a husband, William Hannon, and together, I guess, that we don't know, but it made the money and left the money to benefit the citizens of Detroit, and left it up to his wife to decide what to do with it. And this wasn't the first choice, by the way, when she finally decided on. She went try to do other things, including possibly doing what's now Orchestra Hall. That didn't work out. But one of the things is that they ran a real estate company, or that's what he built up, and plotted a lot of property in Detroit when it was booming. And they compiled his views about sort of life and real estate and what it was to be a business person, et cetera, into what they call the Hannon Bible. And there's an Old Testament, New Testament. He was the Old Testament. The New Testament was his successor, who didn't fare as well. But some of the interesting things